Hello everyone, how's it going? Welcome to my Wild Rift tier list for patch 3.5a. This patch was very big with a lot of buffs and a lot of nerfs to a lot of champions this patch, and that means that my tier list has obviously changed quite a bit. I'm going to go through every single role in the game. I'm going to let you know all the nerfs and buffs that happen and whether champions move up or down the tier. But as always, if you feel like a champion deserves to be higher or lower in a tier list, let me know down in the comments. I always love to read the comments and also like to reply and give you maybe a little bit more insight into some champions that you might have questions on. And also make sure you subscribe, hit that like button, and stay tuned for more Wild Rift content coming very soon. So first up, let's start off with the Baron lane, aka the top lane, depending on which side of the map you are on. And let's first talk about Aatrox. Now, when Aatrox first released in patch 3.5, he was probably one of the best Baron laners in the game, probably the best Baron laner in the game. And obviously in patch 3.5a, no surprise, he did receive quite a lot of nerfs. His base attack speed went down, his third ability, the healing, went down, the first ability, the sweet spot damage went down. And also there was a little bit of like monster damage as well, which also went down. But in my opinion, Aatrox still stays in the S+ tier. I don't think that the nerfs that they gave Aatrox were enough for him to move outside of the S+ tier. He still has a lot of healing. He still has a lot of crowd control. He still has a lot of damage. And he's just all round just a great Baron laner to play. If you're looking for a new Baron laner to play, obviously with Aatrox being a new champion, he's definitely one to play. And to be honest, he's not really the hardest to play either. You just have to make sure you understand the first ability, you hit the sweet spot, and make sure that you try and get an advantage in the laning phase, because that's kind of where Aatrox can shine, and then you can look to snowball after that as well. Next up is Gwen. Now, Gwen is an interesting one in Baron lane. I've left her in the S+ tier, but I was actually thinking of moving her down into the S tier. Her base attack damage going down is actually pretty big for the laning phase. It means she can't trade as effectively as before, because before what you did with Gwen in patch 3.5 is you basically use your third ability, just kept dashing, and then kept auto attacking enemy champions, and you would do a lot of damage every time. That means you stack up your first ability and trade with your first ability. But now with the base attack damage going down, it means that when you're dashing forward, you're not going to be able to trade as effectively. And not also that, but also the cooldown of the third ability also went up by quite a bit in the early game, which means that with your third ability, you have to make sure you use it wisely. Because if you use the ability and if you don't get any auto attacks in to reduce the cooldown, then you're basically going to have it wasted. I think it's like a 17-second cooldown at level 1. So very scary to try and play aggressive with Gwen in the laning phase. In my opinion, Gwen is still a very strong champion. You can still play passive, and to be honest, Gwen's scaling is still absolutely disgusting. The base attack damage going down obviously affects our early game, but our third ability, the cooldown is still the same at maximum level, and also the refund percentage is actually higher now when you're getting into the mid and late game, when you get leveled a few levels into your third ability. But yeah, and then when you get into late game, Riftmaker, Nash's Tooth, Death Cap, all you need is 3 items for Gwen, and then you become an absolute powerhouse. So that's why she stayed up into the S+ tier for me. But again, I was kind of thinking, S or S+ tier. I wasn't really too sure. I was actually thinking of moving her down, but I think she can stay up there for now. But to be honest, anyone in like the S+ and S tier, you can play and give a try, because honestly, all of these champions are absolutely great. Graves as well. I actually did move Graves up, to the A tier, and the reason being is that he did receive quite a lot of nice buffs this patch. His first ability, yes, it has a longer cooldown in the early game, but in the late game it has a lower cooldown now. Sorry, the early game was an increase in cooldown, but the late game is now lowered in cooldown. And also your first ability now does more damage based on your attack damage, so more AD ratio. The monster damage did go down by a little bit, but we don't really care about that with Baron lane Graves. Only bad thing is that Navori Quick Blades did get quite a big bit of a nerf, but I think in Baron lane most of the time you could just go for like more of a bruiser build with Black Cleaver, Bloodthirster, more going for sustain, because you're going to be trading a lot. Mostly in the jungle you'll just be farming a lot of jungle monsters the whole time, so you'll just be able to basically build Navori Quick Blade, Solari Charge Blade, all these really quick burst items, then look to try and gank a lane. But in the Baron lane it's a little bit more difficult to do that, because you'll be trading against a lot of very strong bruisers. So in my opinion, Graves is definitely deserved to be moved up. Sorry, I forgot to move this down, because can't miss out Kale down at the bottom there, still in still sitting nicely down in C tier. But yeah, other than that, not really anything else has changed in the Baron lane. As I mentioned, most of the S+ tier and S tier champions are really fun to play. They're really good at the moment in the current meta. You know, Gragas with this new blue build that people have been playing has been you know, rising up and become very strong. Akali's still a very strong assassin. You got so many good bruisers as well, so many good tanks as well, even with you know, the likes of Malphite, Shen as well, which I'll be talking about a little bit later on. Yeah, a lot of changes. Another champion actually that I completely forgot to mention is Olaf as well. Olaf has moved up as well, in my opinion, up from A into A+, because his first ability got changed. His first ability, now every single time you hit your first ability on an enemy champion, you reduce their armor by 20%, which is pretty big for Olaf in the laning phase, because mostly what you do in the laning phase is you try and set up the wave perfect, and then what you can do is you can use your first ability to slow enemy champions, and you could just basically run them down. And then the lower health you get, the more attack speed you get with Olaf, so you'll be able to trade very effectively in the early game in the Baron lane. And then you can just build tanky, you can build bruiser, you can go for more damage if you want to with like Trinity Force, and then I can actually be very strong with Olaf in the Baron lane. So both Olaf and Graves has moved up for me, but most of the rest of the tier list is stayed the exact same. I think the next one is going to surprise quite a lot of you, because I have changed a lot in the jungle tier list. The jungle tier list has changed quite a bit, mainly because of new champions being added in, and new champions that I wanted to add into the jungle tier list because I feel like they're worth adding in. First one is Yone. Yone in the jungle is very strong at the moment. His clear speed is very fast. He's able to stay quite healthy in the jungle, and not only that, something I wanted to generally talk about in the jungle is that most of the time when you're playing jungle, this gives you a lot of free time in the early game to just farm up, try and gank a few lanes, but most of the time it might not work. But it gives you basically free scaling in the jungle, because you're never going to be put under any threat in the jungle. It's not like PC League that you're going to get invaded and, you know, you're going to get your blue buff or red buff stolen, because that is very difficult to do in Wild Rift. So it's basically free farming, free scaling. You can maybe try and look for a gank, which with Yone you can actually gank quite well because of your third ability. You can just gank during the lane, use your third ability to dash forward, and you have your clone behind you, which you can easily dash back to, deal a lot of free damage, and then jump backwards. But yeah, Yone, insane scaling, insane early game clear, and it's exactly the same with Aatrox as well. I just mentioned briefly about Aatrox in the Baron lane. Aatrox is another very strong jungler at the moment, even though his monster damage did go down ever so slightly with the nerfs in patch 3.5a. But I feel like him in the jungle, again, very strong, a lot of sustain, a lot of easy clear. And again, it means you can easily scale into the mid and late game without being touched, you know, without being put under any threat. And, you know, both Yone and Aatrox are insane during team fights as well. So that's another reason why both of them are staying up there. Or why both of them are up there. Speaking of staying up there, Kha'Zix is staying up in the S+ tier, even though his base AD did get lowered, which means that his early jungle clear is going to be going down ever so slightly. But to be honest, I think every single, you know, jungler's early jungle clear is very fast now because of the base 600 smite. Now that you can basically just smite, you know, camps and they basically die in one hit. That's how strong smite is at the moment in the early game. With Kha'Zix, I mean, you still scale insanely well into the late game. You still have so many strong items you can build: Duskblade, Ghostblade, Serpent's Fang, Black Cleaver. All these items are still very strong. You just might not be able to trade as much in the early game anymore, whether that's like, you know, contesting around the Scuttle Crab because you won't be that strong in the early game because your base AD went down, whether that be early ganking as well. With Kha'Zix, most of the time you just want to farm up, try and look for ganks where you can, but you want to try and get to level 5 as quick as possible to get your first evolve, and then you're one of the fastest clearing junglers in the entire game. In my opinion, he stays up in the S+ tier for now because I think as a jungler, he's still very strong. As a champion, he's still very strong, and his kit is very useful. Another champion is Olaf. His jungle did get nerfed to this patch, even though he did get the increased armor penetration now, basically, or the armor reduction, which kind of helps him when he's ganking. It means when he ganks, if he uses his first ability, the armor reduction is going to be there. So it's really good if you got 2 bruises in the Baron lane, you walk up, use your first ability, and then they're going to get 20% armor reductions. That means that you and your Baron lane will also do extra damage to them. So Olaf's ganking has gotten stronger, but the base damage on his first ability did go down, and also the third ability only does 50% now to monsters in the jungle. But I still think with Olaf you can clear the jungle very, very fast, especially if you do get low on health. You do gain that extra attack speed as well, so that means you can clear through the jungle very fast. You can scale again pretty freely and not be put under any pressure, which means that Olaf can get a few items, and then when you get into the middle lane game, you're just unstoppable. You just use your ulti, run through the entire team, and you are very, very strong. Next champion I want to talk about is Diana. Diana did receive a little bit of a buff, and in my opinion, she has moved up into the S tier for me. Diana's been creeping around and has been played in the jungle quite a few times. Because of how healthy she can stay through the jungle, how much clear speed she has as well, especially with like Ludens if you want to go like Ludens, or you can go Rod of Ages if you want to be tankier. But Ludens Echo with Diana's jungle clear as well. Your first ability does AoE damage. You can hit multiple jungle camps at the same time with like Raptors and Krugs. Second ability does a lot of damage. Your third ability resets. You can keep activating that over and over again. The big thing is that her base health did get increased, which means she's going to be healthier now in the jungle. And also the third ability, the cooldown did get lowered. So if you do miss your first ability now, or if you just want to do a little bit of extra damage in the jungle with your third ability, the cooldown does get lowered. So it means that jungle clear speed is going to be a little bit faster, and also you'll be able to stay more healthier in the jungle. Next up is Kayn. Kayn, okay, so in my opinion, Ross Kayn was already pretty good in the last patch, in patch 3.5. I didn't think it was like insanely strong, but now with these buffs, I do think that Ross Kayn is very, very strong. Obviously, Shadow Kayn is still down in A+, because there wasn't really that much, that many buffs with Ross Kayn. And to be honest, Ross Kayn could probably move down even into A tier. Sorry, Assassin Kayn. Sorry, the blue version can probably move down into A tier because there wasn't that many buffs for him. But Ross Kayn did get a huge amount of buffs. The AD ratio on the first ability up, base AD went up, the ultimate damage went up. There was so much that happened to Ross Kayn. Also, you get your passive a lot quicker now, which you might have seen in one of my YouTube videos. The passive did go up. Which means you can get your orbs quicker, which means you can get your Rust form quicker, and which means you could be more useful quicker. You know, you got so much healing, so much crowd control, so much damage as well, and survivability. And this champion is so fun to play. I'm really, really glad that they buffed Kayn, because he did feel a little bit on the weaker side in terms of new champion releases, but now I think he is in a very, very strong spot. I did receive a little bit of a nerf in the jungle. Her passive now doesn't do any extra damage to monsters. It now does 0% extra damage instead of 50% extra damage, which means that you're basically not going to be able to do anything really in the jungle, unfortunately. I mean, just thinking about it now, I think you still should be fine, because most of the time in the jungle you're mainly clearing with your third ability or even your first ability. So I think most of the time you'll be fine in the jungle. You just won't get the extra damage from your passive anymore on the monster damage, but I think most of the time it should be okay, to be fair, because before you got a little bit of damage bonus with your passive, but now you don't really have the damage bonus. But you still have your first ability, which did get buffed. Your passive damage overall did get buffed, so it mainly benefits mid and Baron lane Irelia more, and nerfs jungle Irelia. But I still think jungle Irelia is very, very strong. If you know how to play the champion, if you can play in the jungle, I still think she's really strong, and that's why she stayed in the S tier. Again, I don't think her jungle clear speed is that fast anymore because of her passive. And again, I think she's probably on the weaker side in terms of all the S tier picks. But I still think she's stronger than the champions below, you know, in the A+ tier. So that's why I kept her in the S tier. Gwen did receive a pretty big nerf. She stayed in A+ tier for me. I don't think she deserves to be any lower than A+. I spoke about it briefly in the Baron lane, but the base attack damage did go down, which means your jungle clear speed, especially in the early game, is very, very weak. And also your third ability, because it has increased cooldown, and if you didn't know, your third ability refund doesn't actually work on jungle camps. So that means that you're going to be using your third ability, and that's going to have a 17-second cooldown, which means your jungle clear speed is going to be a lot lower than before. But your first ability still does a lot of damage. It still does AoE damage in the jungle, and that's kind of your main ability now to clear through the jungle. You're not reliant so much on your auto attacks. on your third ability, you're more reliant on your first ability. So make sure you auto attack a few times before you use your first ability, so you have the first ability at full stacks and you can clear the jungle. But again, Gwen, as I mentioned, in the jungle, you're pretty much not going to be put under any pressure. You can get 3 items and then Gwen becomes absolutely unkillable in the late game. Graves, with the little bit of a nerf that happened in the jungle with his first ability, has stayed in the A+ tier for me. I think that the weird thing about the Graves changes is that, yes, the monster damage did go down, but the AD ratio did go up. And most of the time with Graves, you are building a lot of AD anyway. So in the early game, it's going to be probably a little bit weaker because you don't have that extra percentage of monster damage. But as the game goes on, it becomes easier and easier because the more AD you have, the more damage that you're going to be getting on your first ability. So I don't think it will affect too much. And also his ultimate did get buffed as well. His damage on his ultimate did get buffed. So it means that when he's ganking and when he's trying to trade, you know, with enemy champions, then you're going to be doing a lot more damage to them. So I still think that he is completely fine. Another new champion I've added is Mr. Darius himself, as I take a quick drink. Mr. Darius himself in the jungle. I played quite a few Darius games. I don't think he is insanely strong. I don't think he is a, you know, an S tier pick. I think he's a very solid A+ tier pick. The reason being is that, you know, Darius jungle clear speed now is quite strong because of the passive change that happened. It now does 200% damage to monsters. But the thing is that it's a weird one because Darius ganking wise is very, very difficult, and that's why I've decided to go for phase rush in the jungle, because when you're playing jungle, Darius is very, very difficult to gank at times. Because when you walk into lane, if the enemy laners have any source of crowd control, they can easily just CC you. You don't have any mobility at all. The only mobility that you'll probably have is Protobell and phase rush, so it's very, very difficult to gank at times. But during them during the skirmishes, especially the early game skirmishes, and during them team fights, that's where Darius can come online. And that's why, in my opinion, Darius can be a jungler that can be very, very strong, because around them dragon team fights, around the major objectives, around them skirmishes, that's where Darius can shine. His ganks might not be that good, and he might not be able to do too much when trying to chase down you know, the back line if they're, you know, if you're against a long range AD carry, because you're very reliant on melee champions. You know, you'll still be very strong. I still think Darius is okay, and I still think Darius is worth you know, putting in the A+ tier. Warwick did receive a little bit of a buff. I kept him in the A+ tier. I believe it was his ultimate that got the width increase, so it means it's now easier to hit your ultimate. But they kind of changed like a bug that happened with Warwick with, I think it was Meteor Enchant or something like that. So Warwick, in my opinion, stays in the A+ tier. I still think he's a pretty solid champion. Has a lot, you know, of crowd control, has a lot of healing, and he's pretty good. I don't think there's anything wrong with Warwick at all. I think he's a very solid beginner-friendly champion to play. Carry potential, maybe there, not really. I don't know. It's a little bit of a weird one for sure. But I do think that Warwick can be very, very good. Ramos got a nerf, but he stays in A tier. I mean, in my opinion, Ramos is still only good in lower elos. I think the higher elo you go, the harder it gets to play a Ramos. He is quite difficult to deal with at times, but I do think that but the higher elo, higher elo you go, the more difficult it comes, because players will start to understand how to play around Ramos, you know, how to play against Ramos as well, and what to build against Ramos, etc, etc. You know, like building playing champions like Vayne that does a lot of true damage is very important, or getting a hyper carry that can scale well into the mid and late game so you can burst through the tankiness of Ramos. Obviously Thornmail is a bit of a problem, because at times you could deal more damage to yourself because of Thornmail and also Ramos's second ability. But he's a champion that doesn't really offer too much. You know, you can roll around, you can gank pretty well early on. Your ultimate is pretty good, but you can get kited very, very easily by any source of crowd control. Rengar buff stays in the A tier. I don't think the second ability is really what Rengar needed. I think when Rengar got nerfed quite a while ago with his base AD, meant that his jungle clear speed was quite low. It might be better now, to be fair, the jungle clear speed of Rengar, because of the changes in the jungle. He did receive a little bit of buff to the second ability, but I don't think that does really mean too much. I think it was base damage and also the healing as well on the second ability. So it means that he can sustain a little bit more during the jungle, and he can sustain more during team fights. But I still think, especially with the Navori quick lane nerfs as well to Rengar, I definitely don't think he is, really, as strong of a champion. And Shen as well. Shen received a big buff in the jungle. In patch 3.5, he did receive the buff with the first ability doing AoE splash damage. Now the first ability does 200% damage to monsters. And I'll be totally honest with you, Shen's jungle clear speed is absolutely disgusting. If you saw yesterday's YouTube video, you would have realized how much damage Shen does. And it's absolutely ridiculous. So yeah. Jen's jungle clear speed, very good. His ganking as well is surprisingly pretty good. You can either walk to lane and use your third ability with flash and catch an enemy off guard, or you could just keep farming and use your ultimate as a counter gank. So if you feel like any one of your laners are put under any threat, or if there's any fighting going on, if they're low on health, just use your ultimate. You'll be completely fine. And then you'll be able to get into that lane and basically gank from anywhere in the map, which is why I think Shen can be very strong. But he's not very good as a carry jungler. That's why, in my opinion, he's down in the A tier. Not very good as a carry jungler. It's a little bit of a weird one. I think he has potential, and I think it can be very good. But I think there's just a lot of other junglers, you know, in the tiers above that are just a lot stronger, that can carry a lot more than Shen. But I think the idea is very cool to play Shen jungle. All right, told you there was a lot of jungle changes. All right, onto the mid lane now. Vex, I've moved up into S+ tier. I had her down in S tier before. And I felt like she was going to be, you know, kept down in S tier because of the nerfs that happened to her. But I still think Vex is very strong, and I do think she deserves her spot in the S+ tier. I think the amount of wave control that you have in the early game, the fear is so strong. Your ultimate is very powerful. You have a lot of tankiness as well because your second ability giving you a lot of shielding, and also you just do a lot of burst damage as well if you can fear someone. So very good champion to play. Pretty easy champion to play. Again, a lot of wave control, a lot of burst damage that you can deal, and you can trade very well. I played against Vex a few times in the mid lane, and I think she was very difficult. Diana, obviously buff, as I mentioned, in the jungle, base health and also third ability going down. Again, you know, nothing really changed with Diana because she was ready S+ tier in my opinion, and she stays there because of the buff. Irelia stays in the S tier even after the passive you know, changes in a way, or the passive, you know, where they nerfed the monster damage but they increased the base damage of the passive, which means that, you know, Irelia Baron lane and Irelia mid lane did get buffed. In my opinion, you know, she is worthy of potentially being S+ tier in both the Baron lane and the mid lane, but she's a very difficult champion to play and a very difficult champion to master. So that's why she's just down the S tier for now. Fizz got a nice little buff. Some of you might have seen my A to Z guide of Fizz. I actually really enjoyed playing Fizz as well. I do think Fizz is actually a very strong champion. You do struggle a lot during the early game, I've realized, but once you reach the mid and late game, and you have to make sure that you pick Fizz against squishy champions because you can basically one-shot them, but against tanky compositions I think Fizz can be very hard because you can't burst them from 100 to 0, which is kind of what Fizz wants to do. But I have moved Fizz up into S tier. I was thinking whether he deserves S tier or A+ tier. I'm not really too sure. I think he's on like the borderline of S and A+, but I moved him up into S tier for now because I do think he's very strong. I do think he has a lot of burst damage. Even though his lane phase is difficult, you can just play very passive. Wait until you can get your advantages, proc your electrocute, dash in, use your ultimate to try and one-shot enemy champions and look to roam around the map. That's really where Fizz can shine, is roaming around the map, especially when you have your ultimate available. And Veigar as well got a pretty nice buff in this patch with the base attack damage, which means that farming in the early game is a lot easier, and also you got a little bit of base mana regeneration as well. But I don't think he's worthy of moving up. I just do think he does deserve to stay in the A+ tier. A+ tier for now. Other than that, everything else has pretty much changed, pretty much stayed the same in the mid lane. You know, Yone's still very strong. Kassadin, Karma, Akali, Ari, all these champions are very strong. Even all the A tier champions are very strong as well. And again, as I mentioned, nothing else has really changed. Now, dual lane, there's one champion that I just want to talk about. I think there's only really one champion to talk about in the dual lane tier list because of this patch, and that is Varus. Varus received another buff. I don't know how many patches this is in a row now that Varus has received a buff, but it's absolutely disgusting. And I think there just becomes a time and a place where this champion will start to be completely broken. I do think he is already broken in competitive play. I think he's one of the strongest champions at the moment, or strongest dual lane AD carries at the moment in competitive play. And I think that's just going to get even stronger now because of the buffs that he received. Yes, I understand that solo queue is a different environment, and I understand that Varus is not really a hyper carry in a sense in solo queue. So I understand that, you know, Riot buffing them is probably because he has a lower win percentage in solo queue because he's not that hyper carry champion, you know, like a Lucian, Caitlyn, Tristana, Ezreal, champions like that. He does have a very, very different playstyle to other AD carries. You're more reliant on your crowd control, on your ultimate. You're more reliant on staying back and using your poke more than anything else. You're not really reliant too much on your auto attacks. But I do think that Varus is now in a strong enough position to be moving up into the S+ tier. I think this champion is just absolutely disgusting now. You do so much damage with Varus now. You get so much extra attack speed now, which helps you with your man immune build. And also your Hail of Arrows, your third ability, now does more damage based on how much AD you have. Your AD ratio got increased. So, yeah, in my opinion, Varus moving straight up into the S+ tier. And again, not really much has changed in the duo lane. Obviously, there was the nerf to Navori Quickblade. So Lucian build is a little bit different now. I don't think we're going to be going for the Infinity Edge Navori Quickblades build anymore because I don't think the you know, value is worth it, in my opinion, for Navori Quickblades anymore on Lucian. I think going for like the Stormrazor, Solari Charge Blade, Infinity Edge, so that 3-item combo is just going to be stronger for Lucian now. Obviously, Caitlyn's very good because you have so much range. You have Ezreal as well, which is still really good. Tristana. Again, loads of champions in the S tier that can move up. Kai'Sa, Xayah, Draven, Vayne, Samira. A lot of good AD carries that you can play at the moment in the current meta. And you still have the AP mages as well, which obviously AP mages are not as strong in solo queue compared to competitive play, but they can still be played down the duo lane. If you do have a team that has a lot of AD damage, you need a source of AP damage, then go for someone like a Corki or some of them AP mages like, you know, potentially Ziggs, Lux, or Rihanna. Again, not really too much to talk about. If you do want to, you know, if you do have any questions and if you do have anything or any sort of opinions of any champions, and then please do let me know down in the comments. Again, I just don't want to go through every single champion because I don't want to lose my voice before I start casting this weekend. Finally, the support. Again, I don't think anything has changed in the support role. I think all the champions are staying the same. There was a few nerfs. Thresh did receive a little bit of a nerf in the early game to his Flay, but I still think he is a very, very strong champion. Has a lot of pressure in the early game, and to be honest, Thresh's passive damage is absolutely disgusting. It's so dumb how much auto attack damage Thresh does in the early game because of his passive. I think it's very, very disgusting. Very, very strong. And he still does do a lot of damage even after the nerfs to the third ability. And also Soraka received a little bit of a nerf. She received a health per level nerf, but she still stays in the A tier. But again, everything else is still going to stay exactly the same in the support role because nothing's really changed in the support role. You know, most of the changes did happen, especially in the jungle. That's why jungle is getting a lot more attention this tier list compared to other roles, as I've already explained other champions a lot and why they deserve to be there. But again, as I mentioned, if you do want a little bit more insight into why a champion is in a certain tier, then please let me know down in the comments. Again, if you do have anything that you want to you know, suggest for the website, this is my website, Wild Rift Fire, with the guys over at Mobifire. You can go onto this website and check out all the champion builds that you want to. You have a tier list, you have a rune tier list as well. Every single champion, you can have a look at the Shen jungle guide if you want to as well, which you have the build and everything there. Aatrox jungle as well, which I've added in as well. So there is a lot of things that you can check out on the Wild Rift Fire website. But as for this video and as for the tier list, this is done. Hopefully you enjoyed this tier list video. Again, let me know down in the comments what you think. And as always, stay safe. And I'll see you in the next Wild Rift video. Peace.